Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fauscette. Each week, we interview experts in artificial intelligence, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. Welcome. Our show today is the December edition of AI Pulse, which you probably guessed because Tom Pringle, my co-host, sitting here, director of pilot research, and we'll jump into some interesting conversation about some of the recent AI news, discuss their impact on business, just like we do every month. Before that, though, I wanted to do just a little bit of holiday housekeeping. So if you're watching this, it published on the 16th, so you know that already. Then the following Monday, the 23rd, we'll have what is the last episode of season 2. And then I'll probably put up a few old episodes as we go through the holidays just to do a bit of a best of. It was such a good back catalog that I think some of the episodes might be interesting to bring back to the front. And then, of course, season 3 launches mid-January, and we're working on lining up guests and getting things going for that. So it should be fun. Should be a fun season next year. So I'm excited to do that. And then hopefully you enjoyed the new intro and you'll enjoy the new outro and see we're getting all this good stuff ready for season 3. So.
Personally, I'm a big fan of the new intro, but I'm curious, talking in seasons, Michael, do you have a cliffhanger, to kind of keep us carried across?
Yeah, I should put a cliffhanger in at the end of the next episode. So maybe I'll think about that. I'm not sure. One thing I have been thinking about, and I'd love, comments back from any of the audience too, but I've been thinking about maybe adding just a short AI generated podcast midweek that just covers some of the current announcements and things that are going on. Pretty much would look like the same content that's in the newsletter, but it might be easier to consume if you listen to it. So I'm debating that one for next season. So that's I'd love to know if there's interest in that. So anyway.
Cool.
Yeah, well, it could be fun. It could be fun, and I've been having fun playing with the Google's Notebook LM and Synthesia, and actually I've got a little surprise. Yeah, you know what? There is actually a little something I was going to add to the next episode, so I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. But I do have a little AI generated treat I was going to add to the next episode, so we'll see.
My goodness, stay tuned. Well, I can't compete with that whatsoever, but as people can probably tell, and Michael, no doubt you noticed, I've been moving my office around again, as I like to do on a regular basis. Two things about that. First, I definitely haven't got the lighting right, so I apologize for that. And number two, the surprise from my end might be that I put these pictures up, and there's still more to go. So if they drop off during the live recording, it's my...
That's right.
It could be a classic comedy gold moment, but just there it is.
Well, that's good. I'm not in my regular office, as people will notice. I'm at my mom's for a couple of weeks, but the pictures behind me in my office are real too. That's not a backdrop, and I've managed to not knock them off yet during a show. I have knocked them off, just not during a show. So I feel good about that. I mean,
well, it reminds me of the first time I used virtual reality, and I forgot that I was in a confined space. I was in my flight simulator, turned around, thought, wow, I can see into the back of the plane. Look, I actually move through towards the back of the plane and bang into the wall. It's like, oh yeah, reality, not virtual reality.
Yeah. Well, yeah. That's all right. Well, why don't we get into it? We had a lot of interesting things going on, but I will save the sort of series of OpenAI stories for the last of what we're talking about today, because I was looking at our list and like, oh, we have a lot of OpenAI things to talk about, and then I remembered they're doing this 12 days of AI announcement thing, and apparently it's working because they certainly do have a lot of press out there. So, but I wanted to start somewhere that people have been talking about for a little bit, and that's this Apple announcement that they had launched their ChatGPT integration with Siri. I haven't actually given it a try yet. The new versions just hit, I think, maybe yesterday, so I'll have to do my updates. But it is an interesting play, and I kind of thought that this was a counterpoint to the announcements that the Federal Trade Commission in the U.S. is trying to break up Google, and one of the big issues has been that they pay Apple to be the default search engine on an iPhone. And so I wonder now, obviously, OpenAI is not as big of a threat in a monopoly sense, maybe, that Google is with search, but isn't it kind of interesting that that now OpenAI is paying Apple to make ChatGPT the default for the iPhone?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, it's no comment on search dominance. Although I suppose I would say this: it's interesting, isn't it? To what extent does kind of the large language model paradigm start to challenge traditional search? I think we've all kind of gone through that thought process. And to be fair, when I kind of Google stuff, and I do Google stuff, the new AI generated results are often quite good at the top. I mean, I'm not going to say they're perfect, but I don't think Google ever claimed they were going to be. So that's quite.
And they're also above the sponsored research, so you get sponsored
stuff too, right?
Yeah, which is nice because I can just read that and go on. I don't have to look down the page to try to find the unsponsored link.
Yeah, and then we can have some fun talking about SEO at some point, but maybe not right now.
Right. Well, and I mean, honestly, ad revenue, because the more people look at that top generated AI piece in the Google search, the less eyeballs they're getting on the sponsored links, which is economically in the long term a problem, I guess. And then I saw Perplexity launched a marketplace for Christmas, and of course they're ending up as default search for a lot of people, across different devices. I mean, even on two of my Arc browser instances, I use it as the default instead of Google. And I do have one profile that does use Google, but
yeah, it's curious. And indeed, I mean, how do you monetize a summary generated by AI? I don't know the answer to that. But back to your original question, which I think I probably already completely ducked or tangented away from, whichever you prefer. I'll let you choose. I think it's interesting because I haven't had a chance to play with it either. I did think about trying the Apple Intelligence, kind of the beta stuff. Then I realized that my iPhone is set to British English, and apparently that's not supported, or it wasn't the last time I checked. So unfortunately, given the British English thing, I'm not a big expert in Apple Intelligence yet.
Well, so interestingly enough, my iPhone is set Siri is set to have a British accent. I just found it more pleasant than listening.
Fair enough. But it's the inevitable kind of shift of, kind of how we interact with kind of, and really it's interacting with information in many ways, right? You think about it in those terms. And Apple has proven itself to be a very capable market player in terms of keeping people in a certain ecosystem. I spend a lot of my time in that ecosystem. I have no issue with it. And generally it works rather well. I genuinely will look forward to trying the ChatGPT stuff. Because you know what? I'm going to make a terrible, terrible admission. I have never used ChatGPT.
Really interesting.
No.
I do use it all the time, as you know, and I've talked about that quite a lot, that I use it everything from, brainstorming ideas for all sorts of things, even, marketing, business development, all the kinds of things that you hear people talking about. And it is really good. Although, like I said, we're going to jump into a few other OpenAI announcements in a minute. And I think there's some interesting things that we can talk about there, but I do think it will certainly help. I don't use Siri a ton. Now I do use it like in the natural way you'd expect, like it reads me my text messages when I'm out taking the dog for a walk, or things like that. But I don't often ask Siri a question because I have Perplexity on my phone and I have Google on my phone. So,
Yeah. Well, indeed, and I think kind of casting my mind back, and it's like I don't think this is a particularly unique view. when people talked about Siri and all these voice assistants, kind of had this idea of basically the kind of technology that appears we're playing with now, rather than just as. To be fair, look, if I'm cooking in the kitchen, I say Siri, set an 8-minute alarm, which I probably just
I do that. I usually use Alexa because I have both at my house and here at my mom's, I have Echo devices within range, and so I usually just do that. But I have certainly done it on my Siri phone as well. So
I see. Annoyingly, you've got headphones on, so I can't ask kind of Alexa to do stuff for you via the podcast.
Yeah, well, luckily there's not one up here, because otherwise we'd be having a conversation. And the other thing I was going to add in, as we're talking about devices and Apple, iPhone, I bought I bought a couple of these. I bought the Humane AI one, which is terrible, horrible. I wrote it a 1-star review. It's really not good. But the Rabbit has much more promise, I think, and they've slowly been rolling out features, and they finally put some beta features out over the last few weeks that I'm really, really interested in. It's basically the ability to train your Rabbit to do routines based on mouse clicks in a window on your browser, in their interface, and it learns those different, like you could go here, I'm going to set up one so it schedules meeting for me on my Google Calendar, or stuff like that. So I haven't done a lot with it yet, but I've used a couple of them, and the meeting scheduling one, for example, and it is pretty interesting. I could see where this could get to be reasonably valuable if I can train it to be a personal agent, basically. So
fair, totally fair. I mean, it's I was going to be cynical and miserable and analysty a little bit about it and say it does sound a little bit like macros on a full fat diet.
Sort of,
but that's not to say that that's not without value. So yeah, curious.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, agentic AI is the buzzword for next year, and we've all hit that in
It certainly is. No doubt we'll get into some of that conversation, because a couple of the topics we've got here.
I suspect that will be, I'm sure.
I still, I'll just own my position on this, which is I still don't like that term. I mean, I get it, and it makes sense, and it's fairly practical, but for some, it just doesn't sit well with me. I don't know why.
Yeah, there's a few of them that, I mean, agentic AI, I think, is an interesting term, because it's not, you think of it, you think of agent, but what it really is to thinking of agency, and the fact that it can do things for you. It has agency to do, which is interesting. I mean, it took me a minute to catch that when they first said it, though. I was like, is that just because it's agents? Like, I don't get it. Anyway, but it is, it's evolving. I guess we'll see what that looks like. Did you see the one ServiceNow announcement that I thought was really interesting? I mean, obviously we know how much power it takes to train models, and how much data it takes to train models, and it's expensive and resource intensive, and apparently ServiceNow has built this fast LLM code that they've open sourced now, it optimizes the training, so apparently can give you a 20% speed gain on your training of an LLM, which is significant.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I'd love it to be the case, you cannot train all these models on a Casio calculator from the 1980s that I have in one of my drawers. I suspect that the memory and the processing capabilities might not quite be there. But no, I mean, so as a fundamental level, I'm quite a big fan of the open source approach for lots of different reasons. And I think, you kind of, you get into the whole conversation around software and open source and things like, how that works out, but also from an AI perspective, indeed any technology really, there's the kind of the explainability, auditability element to it as well. And open source, I think, is very helpful for that.
Yeah.
And 20% faster is a big number. I mean, that's going to work out as serious money saved if it's providing 20% back. It leads me to the kind of the one that strikes me consistently is this seems to be a sort of a fairly significant debate bubbling up about DIY AI versus, kind of buy it in. And actually, no, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to stop words coming out of my mouth. I'm going to ask you something.
Okay.
Do you have a strong view on that conversation, or?
Yeah, I think that what you're going to see is more and more and more specialized models. So
Mm,
it's small models because they're more portable and I need it in an edge case, right? Or it's a mid-sized model because it's sufficient for my activity and it trains in 25% of the time or something, right? So I think in industry ones too, right? I have very specific industry needs for, warehouse management or whatever. So I could build an LLM that does that, or even the talk about behavioral training for LLMs and building out behavioral models. eh, that all those things I think are you're going to see more and more companies want, and they're not going to just go to the model providers. They will go to some, but they're also going to take open source models and train them on their own. Because I mean, honestly, their data is valuable, and do they want to? They want an enterprise model that's protects their data and uses RAG and is optimized and all those things. So that's my take
yeah,
anyway.
it's interesting. I think I promised myself I wasn't going to say it depends, so I won't say that. Although I just did. And I'll try not to sit on the fence either, but I will end up inevitably sitting on the fence because I think probably the space of both the DIY approach and the kind of the buy it in approach. I think it depends very much around, to your point, around use cases and such like. And then, of course, there's data considerations and where your data is going or where you don't want it to go, and so on and so forth. It'll be interesting to see it shake out. I think the mass adoption of AI in terms of, sort of sheer numbers will come from that I'm going to buy something and use it like in a productivity way, right? So
Mhm.
although I said I don't use ChatGPT, I use Gemini a fair bit. It's helped me be more productive in some ways,
Mhm.
sure. And that's kind of a very easy, tangible, okay, that made my life easier.
Yeah.
And it gave me some time back to do some other stuff. Whereas when we start thinking about, like I said, the use cases, whether it's a kind of an edge use case or whether it's a highly specialized use case in terms of, it could be something in the medical industry and, what could be, whatever it happens to be. I think then at that point, you might sort of start making a case for, well, we're going to have to do this one a bit ourselves.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the reality is that you're gonna see both, and most businesses even will have both, right? They'll have
Yeah.
some of their own models, and they'll be using some of the public models. I think that's natural, and some of the, the capabilities are evolving. I mean, they're OpenAI, which we'll talk about some of their announcements that they've certainly evolved several different capabilities over the last few weeks that are interesting. And I've been playing around with several betas on the ChatGPT site. Canvas for as a writing assistant is really interesting, and the new O1 high reasoning, high functioning reasoning model. I don't know, whatever to call that, um, is interesting, and
That's the expensive one.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, that eventually, yeah, that's. But yeah, so I mean, I think you're right, though. I think that it's you're just going to see a mixture of things as
Yeah.
companies get into this more and more. They're rolling out more and more types, and they're going to be depends on the use case. I think sometimes the Chat GPT publicly available pro subscription's fine for what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be really curious, and just in a desperate attempt to go back to talking about your original question way back when, I've probably forgotten by this point. We're several minutes in, and this information may be out there already. I do not know, but I'd be curious to see how it works with Apple's integration with OpenAI ChatGPT on the
Mm.
basis of kind of where the data is and what data
Mm.
may be used in terms of kind of contextual answers.
Mm.
And how that's handled from a processing perspective. I know we've talked about it in the past, but it's interesting. It's called Salesforce.com was very
Mhm.
particular about having that trust layer so you could
Yep.
have access to the big models without necessarily giving access to your data,
Yeah.
which I think is a really cool and interesting way of doing it.
Yeah,
My,
well, I mean,
my
Apple has the history of, being very protective of user data, so I assume there is some way they're doing that, but it is an interesting question. I haven't researched it. I mean, did they build in some sort of a, RAG setup that holds your data as contextual data? I don't I don't know.
I don't know, but I'm with you. I think that the likelihood is, it would make perfect sense to me, at least.
Yeah, and they're definitely not training OpenAI's models on that data. That part I have read already, and I was sure they wouldn't anyway. But
Yeah, for sure. Oh dear.
Well,
so
the other. Well, I was going to say the other kind of interesting. Well, actually, there's two conversations. One's kind of an interesting discussion, I guess. So why don't we go there? This was the platformer one I sent you. And platformer, I really like Casey and the commentary they have, and then also the podcast he does with Kevin Roos weekly, Hard Fork. It's a New York Times podcast. Great podcast, and two tech journalists. They have some really interesting discussions and interesting takes. And so this blog post and subsequent newsletter that that the platformer folks put out, I thought was an interesting conversation into what I keep hearing from all of our colleagues, right? That there's this sort of two diverse camps, and then there's some, I suppose, that are in the middle a bit like us, but you've got the curmudgeonly, stuff is all hype and it's not doing anything and businesses don't need it. And then you got the other end, like, oh no, Terminator's going to happen in the next, year or two. And well, yeah, hopefully not. But I mean, but it's an interesting conversation, and there are some fairly well-known and fairly well-placed people that are, falling down on either side of that, and it just seems to me it's a very black and white world, and I don't see it that way, right? I mean, anyway, curious what you thought about it, though.
Yeah, 100%. Talking of black and white, I just saw your dog make a guest appearance in the background. So
she did. She does that once in a while just to make sure.
That's awesome. It's awesome. I've got a picture of my dog up here, but he is shut out because we have work going on at the house, and every time he comes into the office, he barks. And as much as I love him to bits, I don't think it's probably very good for a podcast to have a barking dog on it. But maybe that.
Have his voice on here too. That'd be nice, I guess. I don't
know. We'll see.
He may have an opinion.
Anywho, back to your question, because I'm all over the place today. Sorry about that. Yeah, and it's funny because I almost feel like there's almost a pressure to be on one side or the other of that debate. Mm-hmm. And I'm not entirely sure it's even, this is a classic analyst answer for which I can only apologize, probably don't mean a word of. I can almost argue that the question's slightly wrong, yeah? Which is, you were getting into this, is it real, is it not real? There's definitely something tangible there, right? We can agree there's something tangible there. How far it goes in terms of changing things is obviously up for debate. Any technology can be dangerous. I mean, you can make strong arguments about, CCTV, for example. CCTV can be used to help protect us. It can also be used for more nefarious purposes.
Yeah, no, good one. Yeah.
So
I love the headline. I love the headline that he put on this: "The phony comforts of AI skepticism." I mean, that is exactly what I think. And the tagline was, "It's fun to say that artificial intelligence is fake and sucks, but evidence is mounting that it's real and dangerous." Those are the two parts of that, two ends of that.
I thought it was a really well written piece, and I think it absolutely got to some of the really interesting conversational points about it. But I still think it's sort of slightly the wrong question. It started to become a little bit too. How do I put it? Not opinionated, because a lot of people are opinionated about lots of different things. But it's almost become, kind of a debate that there isn't an awful lot of common ground, and there isn't a lot of middle ground or whatever between the two groups. And that to me is slightly bothersome in its own right. And I think, it plays out into a whole range of different areas. I mean, 100%. Lots of people like to say it's all fake and all rubbish. It's not going to make any difference. Lots of people have concerns. I think there's truth to both of those. But it leads me into a conversation in my head, which is how do we make sure that it's not hopefully dangerous? And is it possible? And then the other question that begs is it possible to do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's It's interesting. I mean, I've definitely watched as a group of my colleagues in the, in the tech analyst world, our colleagues there have fallen down on the side of, oh, this is all hype, it's phony, it's blah blah blah, and that's just not true. I mean, you can say it all you want, and maybe it gets your attention or whatever, but it's not true. And on the other end, I mean, the technology is real. I've been using it for 2 years, and lots of people have been using it, and you can see all the stuff that Salesforce and ServiceNow and Google and all Microsoft, everybody's doing with it. So I don't know how you argue it's not real. Is it dangerous? I mean, I would argue that almost any of the technological advances we've had in the last 50 years are dangerous if they're used in the wrong way. I mean, you could argue that the internet is extremely dangerous.
100%. Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So I don't, I mean, it comes down to how do you use it, right? Anything can be done. I mean, I suppose this LaCroix can could be dangerous in the right setting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point. And I think, I'm with you on it entirely.
I'll put the article in the show notes because if you haven't read it, it is really a worthwhile piece to read. And I think, it obviously, and I've heard both of them, Casey and Kevin Roos, talk about it on their show, and and they come down kind of on the it's real, but we should be a little skeptical about how it's used because it could be dangerous. And I think that's a reasonable approach, right?
Yeah, I agree. And where my head was going on that last bit, where I sort of started to tail off slightly, I sometimes, again, kind of challenge the question type approach to this a little bit. I think, well, some people seem to believe in a very, very fixed definition of AI. And it's a term that has expanded massively. And you can get into kind of like a traditional approach to what AI is and a more modern approach to what AI is and various points in between those and so on and so forth. Well, it's not strictly AI. And I'm like, well, fair enough, it's not strictly AI, but they're calling it AI and everyone else calls it AI. And eventually we're just going to have to accept that is the term that we're using for this collection of technologies.
Yeah. I mean, I think the definition has somewhat evolved, right? I think that's probably
Yeah. At that point, I think you can agree that AI is a bit larger of a definitional term than perhaps was in past. Maybe we can find some of that common ground between these 2 points. I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope
so. But speaking of like dangerous or scary, did you see this article on the Chinese's new? The Chinese police roll out nightmarish crime-fighting robot. I love the headline. Sichuan-based Logon technology, and it's and build out this. It looks a little bit like a BB-8, to be honest. If you were a Star Wars guy, it's a big ball, and it has like all sorts of weapons, and yeah, it was a little on the scary side.
Scary is a word that I would use. It's interesting, Michael. I think my immediate thought when I saw the picture before I started reading the stuff was, "Is this real?"
yeah. I did look for the Onion logo on it at one point.
Because it was
maybe this is a parody. I don't know.
I don't know, and I can't say that I can personally confirm nor deny. But this is always the concern, isn't it? We talk about, and I've said this before. I think you've said it before. I think lots of people said it before. You take this group of AI technologies and you add robotics, and then you give a level of autonomy to that, whatever that thing that you created is, especially if it's got the means to cause harm in whatever form that might be, then you're going to enter very, very uncomfortable debates about kind of the rights and wrongs of that. And there's naturally no one answer that's going to suit every different view out there. It's a bit like the privacy topic,
it is. And I mean, we all know that on all of the leading countries are doing research around how we can apply this technology in autonomous type military equipment. So I mean, the police use of it, I mean, it's not surprising. Certainly, China has a bit of more controlling sort of approach with that, and they have done a lot of surveillance, that sort of thing. So I mean, it doesn't necessarily surprise me, and I know that the military, both here and in China and Russia, everywhere else probably
most places are
working on those. And I don't know if you saw this, but there's been a bunch of unidentified drones flying up and down the U.S. East Coast that nobody knows what they are in New Jersey, apparently. And why I live in New Jersey. I don't know why the droids would be the flying over New Jersey to get whatever. I mean, what did they want? That they're going to take the Pine Barrens?
Part of some vast conspiracy that we can't even imagine.
Maybe they're going to Atlantic City. I don't know.
Gosh, I went many years ago. So who knows? Who knows? But I mean, indeed, I think it's. I think you're right. I think a lot of different countries are experimenting with them. I have lots of questions that probably this podcast is not the place to air those in terms of the rights and wrongs of this, as I was saying earlier. But I did see the piece about the mysterious lights, whether they're actually UFOs or weather balloons or drones.
They've identified them now as drones. They just don't know where they're coming from.
There was a similar thing in the UK. There was an issue with drones flying near or around military bases here. And I mean, it's
in the Ukraine, they've been using commercially available drones as kamikaze drones. I mean, they put a little explosive on them and run them into things. So, I mean, drones are a useful tool, I suppose, but they also have some danger there.
Yeah. Well, I'm afraid to say I'm a bit of a believer in regulation of it, but. That's not always a popular view. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you have to, inside a country's borders. I think you do need to restrain. It's just like any sort of flying thing through the air. I want it regulated to some extent. I mean, I'm up there in a plane. I don't want to run into a flock of drones.
You're on a flight going somewhere, and you had a drone in the on the approach to the landing. That's probably not a good thing. I mean, I'm no expert.
Agreed. Agreed. Anyway, so on to better topics, maybe. I was let's jump into some of the OpenAI stuff, because there's so much stuff going on here. It's kind of crazy. And I guess the timely one was the fact that they had a major outage yesterday. I guess lasted into last night Pacific time. So.
Yeah, I read about it. Like I said, I've never used their product, so I didn't notice it personally. I simply read about the news of it. And it's interesting because, people have outages. I mean, come on, it's essentially a fact of modern technology.
It does, although, to be fair, I don't remember an OpenAI outage until now. I've been using it for the whole 2 years. So, I mean, I'm sure there's been some small outage of some sort, because it's hard to. Interesting, though, because this is the same time. This coincides with, the launch of Sora Turbo to the public last week, the OpenAI, movie video text to video generator.
Yeah.
And I'm I have a pro plan, and theoretically I have access to it, but I have yet to be able to create an account because they got just slammed with people jumping in to use the thing, apparently way more than they expected, which I don't know. I kind of find hard to believe, but whatever. And I just wondered if there's a bit of a tie together with those two events, right? You introduce Sora, it becomes overly popular, and then all of a sudden you have an outage. I don't know. That could easily be a bandwidth demand problem, right?
It's potentially an answer. I mean, it's I don't think I've had chance. I know that we spoke about this on a call that wasn't on a podcast, but everyone knows now that I'm a big flight sim fan. And when they launched that thing, apparently they tested for 200,000 concurrent users, and launch day did not go well.
Yeah, that does not sound like enough in my mind, and and I don't buy it. But.
It seems no, especially not when you can rely on so much streaming for the game to actually, or the simulation. I say calling it a game is a bit unfair. The simulation to work anyway. So maybe just a mismatch in terms of predicted demand. But it's amazing to me just that I can't decide whether this kind of the text to video stuff. It seems really, really interesting and really creative, but it leads me down to this path of, I'm sorry to say it, but kind of deep fakes, fake news, and misinformation, and all that.
I mean, I've been using text to video for a while. I like it, and I have some on my site, and it's good to, it's nice to make marketing videos and that sort of thing. But I mean, this Sora apparently very realistic. I'd love to try it. I've seen some of the videos it created, but I can't get my account set up yet because of the volume there. But I think it's interesting. Yeah, well, I mean, I tried again right before we started recording, so I can tell you, I can confirm right now, it still can't create an account. But I mean, it is interesting, and I don't know. I mean, I think there's a big use for those types of video generators. I mean, there's also, just like we talked about before, there's a dark side too. I get it, but
surely. Indeed. Well, these are the questions that keep coming up with all these technologies, and to your point, precisely and directly. I think you can pick up any piece of technology. Wasn't there a thing about USB cables being potentially?
Yeah, there was.
I can't. I only read it briefly, and I should probably share it on LinkedIn because I was like, "Wow, okay, I didn't know that was even possible." So it just, I think, kind of. There's always it's like it's a bit like when you get kind of those kind of forums on the web that get a bit negative. Let's just put it that way. And it's very easy to criticize and quite difficult to create. So I can sit here and come up with squillions of negative things about these new technologies and how they could potentially be misused. And that's not a bad thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. But I think, bearing in mind what I said a moment ago, keeping an eye on what it can be used for good, and talking about that as well, is a much more balanced approach, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think so. Although I don't know if you saw this. I just read this morning that that now people using Sora have managed to create some videos that are very, very, very disturbingly similar to video games. And of course, they haven't been transparent on how the Sora was trained. And it is interesting that if you prompt it correctly, it creates a pretty realistic copy of a bunch of different video games. So there's a little bit of this could be a problem with the transparency around the training data again, if they've been training on game content. So
I couldn't possibly comment. No, I mean, seriously, who knows? For sure, I did see that briefly this morning as well. I don't know the answer, and wouldn't choose to kind of cast aspersions.
And I suspect that'll end up in a court somewhere to decide that for us. So we probably don't have to.
Yeah, indeed. It's the great, we said it before, I think, it's a few episodes back now, right? It was like when photography first became a thing and they had to figure out copyrights. This is that on steroids.
No question.
Yeah, there's a whole range of different ways you can play this one, and claim that kind of content's being infringed or it's being used to train something that you didn't give permission for. Then how do you prove it? It's a black box, and so on and so forth. It's just it is a true nightmare in terms of the complexity of the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the interesting thing with OpenAI is that with this new subscription tier they announced, maybe the usage will go down a little bit because $200 a month for a subscription is a little bit pricey. I mean, I have a whole lot of $20 a month subscriptions, but they are giving access to O1 Pro through a new Pro level subscription. Now, my subscription's Pro, so I guess they got to come up with a Pro Prime or something. But
always put the word enterprise Pro.
Yeah, it may be. Yeah, because they do have an enterprise plan that's different than this, and an API plan, of course, and then the Pro tier, which I've been on for almost since they launched. But this is the O1 model is really interesting, and I have actually been using the beta a little bit because it's a reasoning model. It it shows you as it goes through what it's thinking as it just discerns whatever the thing is you're trying to solve. So it's better at coding and math problems and things like that, apparently. So I guess maybe if it really is better at coding, $200 a month for somebody who's using it to accelerate their productivity in coding, that's probably not so bad, but maybe for us, it would be a lot.
Well, indeed, right. I mean, it's just classic, what's my return on investment? Am I getting something back for this? And to your point, exactly, if you are using it in a coding environment and it suits your purposes, needs, requirements, etc., then $200 might seem like not very much a month. In just the same way, we think back to kind of the cost of this, even going back before SaaS, software as a service. The cost of some professional software was crazy, but it was deemed as being necessary for certain tasks.
I mean, Photoshop and AutoCAD are the two classic examples, right? They both were very, very pricey when you had to buy them, and most everybody would do the every other upgrade path because you couldn't really justify spending, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, for an upgrade. When, was it incremental or disruptive? It was always incremental because that's how it works. And, so you're right. I mean, it definitely, there'll be plenty of people that'll pay it. And they, to be fair, they have other plans, right? So they have like Team that's $25 per user per month, and Enterprise $60 per user per month. They have the Pro plan that I'm on, which is $20. The cheap person's plan, $20 per month. So I mean, I guess
I'm on the really cheap person plan.
I suppose that's fair. You're in the free world, but I mean, you do, and just like I do, you do have access to Google through your workplace.
Although you say that, it's funny. I mean, I don't know the facts of all of this yet, but like you, I signed up for a subscription to Gemini when it was a separately chargeable thing, and it appears I have to keep paying for it, although it's now included in my workspace.
Yeah, that is weird. That's actually an interesting question. I should probably go check that one out too, because
I think it's because I signed a 12-month contract.
Oh, maybe, because I think mine is now all. I better make sure though, but I think I've moved it all to the workplace subscription. But
I checked. So my contract runs out next year, and I'm surprised. Who knows? But I had to go digging through some admin and some help from Google support to make sure I didn't do that sort of thing again.
No, that's good. It's probably the end of the year. Probably here's a pro tip. It's probably time to audit all of your subscriptions for the year and look to see what you need for next year and don't need, because if you're like me, you've got a whole lot of subscriptions and you've forgotten some of them. I know.
I'm terrible. I genuinely keep a running list.
I should.
I just do, because otherwise I start to lose track of things. I was like, I forgot about that, and I don't use that anymore. And it's whether it's on a personal level, or whether it's a corporate level, there's plenty of corporates out there. I suspect you're probably spending a bit too much money on SaaS tools that you're not necessarily using.
No, that's fair. I mean, it's a tool, and if you're getting the value out of the tool, I don't mind paying for it, especially when the subscriptions are in that range, right? But at some point, I should probably winnow them down, because I do have subscriptions to tools that I'm not really using as much. I mean, I use ChatGPT and Perplexity every day, but do I touch Gemini and Claude as often? No, I do use them sometimes, to be fair, but do I need a monthly subscription? I mean, the Google one's included in my workspace. That's fine. And I don't know, but anyway, well, I think we've rambled on long enough for December though, but I do want to wish everyone a happy holiday. Tom, you definitely enjoy the holidays. Hope you get a little bit of a break.
And to you, Michael, and everyone listening. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's all the time we have today. I'm Michael Fauscette.
And I'm Tom Pringle.
Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next month for a new season and a new episode of AI Pulse. And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining us. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the show. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a review to help others find us. For more research on AI and other software, check out arianresearch.com. If you're an expert in AI, generative AI, or business automation, either as a provider or an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arianresearch.com. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arian Research production. I'm Michael Fauscette, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.